Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your spending some time chatting amongst yourselves. I hope you're jamming up the Jamboard for us and sharing all your thoughts. Um, I'm really honored to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Laurie Kurz. Before that, I want to remind everybody that after Laurie's talk and our discussion, we'll go to our first break. Laurie is currently the Early Literacy Dyslexia Program Manager for the Kansas State Department of Education. Laurie is a colleague who used to teach in a professorial role at Kansas State University. Over the years, she was an elementary teacher as well and a consultant working with some internationally around dyslexia issues. And she leads the team of educators in Kansas that have been working on our reading initiatives and dyslexia initiatives across the state. Given she's had her foot in so many places, she's a great colleague for us to have here. And given all of the work and talk about literacy in our state now, we're just really pleased to have Laurie here to speak with us. So Laurie, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I didn't really bring notes because I was thinking TED Talk. I had to kind of walk around or something. So I'll probably not need to look at this too much. But the title of my talk today is Literacy Changes Lives, because that is truly what I believe, and it's been my experience. And I want to think back to, like, you can see this white hair, like, what did my parents use a phone for? What did I use a phone for, a telephone for when I was younger? My grandparents, there was a time when we just pick up a phone and talk to someone and say, get me this person, and that would happen. Or I thought about shopping, how we used to go into a store and just tell someone what we wanted, and they would direct us there, and we could make that purchase without reading or looking at a review or going through 20 different items that were similar to try to make a conscious decision. So while literacy changes lives, literacy also changes. And I think that's going to be part of the conversation as the day goes on. But I was thinking about how my experience as a teacher has changed over the years. So we've learned a lot about how we teach literacy. And I'm not going to talk about reading because it's more than reading. It's reading and writing and being able to share with others what we know. And I think back to my years in teaching, and I did what I thought was best in teaching young children to read. I spent 15 years in a K-1-2 classroom, looked at my curriculum and did the very best I could at engaging kids in reading. And I did that without a lot of outside information to guide my work. And I'll tell you what I mean. Our daughter was a hurdler here in the state of Kansas. And when Julie was hurdling, we could take her to a coach, and that coach could look at what was happening and give her really clear guidance, like, you need to get out of the blocks faster. You're floating over with your lead leg, your trail leg's not coming down, you got to finish through. You could look at what was happening and tell her what to do to get better. But when we have a child sitting next to us and we're teaching them to read, we can't see what's going on. We think we know. We thought for many years we knew that if we would put some really fun, colorful, predictable books in front of a young child, and we could give them some great cues, like, take a look at that first letter and give it a go. And does that sound right? So we were cueing them to the grammar in a sentence, or does it make sense? Can you just use enough context to figure that out? We thought what we were doing was best practice, but it comes to find out that that's the strategies that struggling readers use when they're learning to read. It's called a 3 cueing system. Some states are actually outlawing it because we were basing our feedback for children on something we couldn't see instead of following the science. So you've probably heard a lot about the science of reading, and that's not a curriculum, and it's not anything specific other than it's a body of knowledge about what we know now about what the brain does when a child reads and how instruction can change that and enhance what's going on. That's what the science of reading is. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing in the state is just making sure that teachers understand what that looks like, because literacy changes lives. And we need to change along as we can be guided by that science of reading. And so one thing we know that helps with that is to shift our instructional practice. You talked about how hard it is sometimes to shift practice. It's so hard. But you can teach an old dog new tricks. We can shift practice. And to shift from balanced and guided literacy practices to a more structured literacy approach. And that's based on what we know from functional MRIs. We now know that students do, and children and adults, we look at every letter in a word. We don't just gain it by a block of one word together. In fact, we're reading way ahead of what we're actually processing meaning-wise. So it is so critical that we look at all the individual letters and teach kids how to do that and draw their attention to all of the letters in a word and the patterns that those letters make. So that leads us to structured literacy. And you're going to hear a lot, you probably already have heard a lot, and maybe some of it's come from me, about what is structured literacy. And I'm excited about this shift because structured literacy brings back that art of teaching. It's the science and the art of teaching. If you look at structured literacy, first, I want you to know it's not a K-2 initiative. It talks about what we teach, and that does include graphemes and phonemes and those phonics patterns and all of that. But it also includes morphemes and Greek roots and Latin roots, and how does our language go together to make meaning? And we look at models that also value intentional vocabulary instruction and understanding of genre and all of the structures of our language that make it such an incredible way to communicate. So we have this what do we teach for structured literacy? But what's really great in this model is the how we teach, and that it's explicit, that we're very clear with kids about what they need to know and be able to do related to literacy. At the beginning of every lesson, we have that anticipatory set. This is what we're going to be doing today, and you're going to be excited to know this when you're done. That explicitness, and then it's very systematic. We have a scope and sequence. There aren't gaps in what our kids are learning. And it's diagnostic. We have to look at the data. We have to see what they can do to know what to teach. And when I was listening to the virtual presentation, I got to thinking that's what we can never replace a teacher with, that, because that formative assessment we do each and every day when we have any kind of a conversation with our students related to our content, and we get an insight onto what they know and what they need to be taught next. That's that art of teaching. It's very diagnostic, very cumulative, spirals up. We come back and we review based on what we know about the brain. And it's also very multisensory. So it values those students that you have that have a gift in art, have a gift in presentation, have other gifts that they can offer to show what they know. Because what might come very easy to you, maybe reading, doesn't come easy for 7 to 20% of the students in your classroom. There's a lot of research out there about the anxiety and the depression that comes from students realizing clear back in kindergarten or first grade that what everyone else seems to be able to figure out, I can't do. And they show up each and every day in our classes knowing they're going to be put in front of such a difficult task and being asked to do things in front of their peers that they can't find success in. So I'm excited that we're really working on making this shift, because I really feel we have to, because literacy changes lives. So for us to have students that can graduate and they can read like a historian and they can write like a scientist and they can fill out their tax forms and they can understand their rental agreements and they can have the literacy skills to apply to be in the military. It's empowering. We need to make sure we can change their lives with our instruction. This summer, or this spring, my grandson turned 18. And at Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa are trying to find him a cool senior year Christmas gift. That's a challenge, right? So he wanted those really expensive shoes. I swear he would probably spend $300 or $400 on a pair of shoes. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. Grandma and Grandpa don't do that. I thought, we're going to get him his first passport, because I work internationally. My husband travels a lot. Like, that's a great gift. So I got the toiletries bag, got the luggage tags, want to have things to unwrap, right? So I go to the computer, I bring up the passport application, like we're going to pay for this and help you get your first passport. It's 4 to 5 pages of technical reading and writing. So we at the State Department, we talk about those kids were limiting opportunities. It's not just limiting an opportunity to go into higher education or even continue in any field. It's, are we limiting their opportunity to even travel to another country? So I really feel that we're working hard. You every day in the classroom, you work so hard to individualize that instruction for your students, to not have those limitations placed around them. And I feel that literacy is a key to help them unlock all of the other things that they might want to do to really empower them. And some of the work I did in Ethiopia, right before I started working at KSDE, I wrote a grant with World Bank to get books into IDP centers, like internal refugee camps. And one of the moms that we interviewed on our video, she said, books bring our, I want to make sure I get it right, books bring our children to a better place. And that really resonated with me because she understood that literacy changes lives. So thank you.
So we have some time for some questions, and we have microphones. So if you have a question from somebody in the audience, wait till the mic gets there so that Laurie doesn't have to repeat it back. We're done. A question, please, right here.
I was just wondering what your thoughts were on comics and graphic novels in education.
I think it's really important that we motivate kids in whatever way we can. And if that's our window in to engaging them in instruction, I think that's a great thing to embrace. However, I am concerned in some of our schools, we want our kids to get content, and I'm talking middle secondary. We want our kids to get content, our content, like they need to know my physics. They need to know my whatever that is, because slow reading doesn't mean slow thinking. So they need access to it. So quite often we'll go to, we're going to do it with a video, but we can't stop there. We have to teach kids to navigate complex texts. So that's the way in, do that, motivate them, let them have that success and that fun, but still continue to support them learning how to navigate complex text so we don't put any limitations for whatever they want to do when they're done. Yeah.
As legislation has changed, and now that we have dyslexia coordinators for districts and handbooks and some of those regulations, what do you see as the continued biggest barrier for Kansas to provide structured literacy in a meaningful way for all students?
As much information as we've put out there, I'm still surprised by some who haven't heard this. But I think one of the biggest barriers is getting everybody on the same page. And I had this conversation with the dean. Until we have our colleges that are preparing our teachers, putting out the same information and saying, we're not going to place a candidate in your school, in your classroom, who is not going to model for our candidates the best practice, and the vice versa, right? And when schools say, we're not going to take a candidate until they come prepared with at least a foundation for what literacy instruction looks like in our classrooms, based on the dyslexia handbook, based on structured literacy, until we all hold each other accountable, it's really difficult to change. Because I've had a foot in both worlds. I've been the classroom teacher for 15 years. I was at K-State for 14 years. We need candidates, and we need all of you, you incredible mentor teachers, to take those student interns, to show them what excellent instruction looks like. Because sometimes it's, you know, that teacher that's like, well, I don't want to get in trouble, so I guess I'll take a student teacher. We need to have the very best stepping up and saying, let me model best practice for these new candidates coming in, because no one is going to learn what they need. You know this, need to be the best teacher only through their methods class in a practicum, right? It takes years of that mentoring. That's why we have mentoring in the state. It's going to take time to bring along anyone to be an excellent teacher. So we need all of you to help us do that work.
Kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, because we have students in our classrooms that do have such a variety of needs. I know one of the big pushes in our district is working on different tiered vocabulary. So we've been talking a lot about tiers 1, 2, and 3 vocabulary. Is there anything that the state's going to put out or to ensure that those candidates that are coming to our classrooms are more versed in working on tier 2 and 3 vocabulary and strategies on how to get our kids to use tier 2 and 3 versus so much of the time, how as educators, I don't want to use the words dumb down, but we do put things in more colloquial terms as we teach it. So as we're trying to get kids to understand technical text, we as educators have to use that higher language as well. So is there something that we're going to see maybe kind of gearing our new teachers or current teachers into that realm?
Well, you've planted a new seed in me, but we do have some vocabulary support materials on the KSDE Dyslexia website. You can always find me just by searching KSDE Dyslexia. But I will be talking to the unit heads this year. I have a great relationship with them. And I think anything we can do as educators, whether we're K-12 or higher ed, we need to have that shared conversation. Here's a need I have, and here's a way we can really build it up. So I will take your information back. Thank you.
One last question, sorry.
No, we've got to move on. I'm
okay.
sorry. We'll get that question to Laurie later. Thank you. Laurie, thank you so much. Let's give Laurie. I do want to mention that working with the State Department, each of the universities have worked together, and they're going to be offering free training this summer that you can get paid for on structured literacy. And the universities will be sending out information on that, so you can go sign up through any university for it. But I think there were 7, is it right? Is that right? 7 different videos and ways to approach structured literacy that we're working on together. So let's move on now to your groups. We have about 10 minutes for that. And when time is up there, I will let you know, and we can take our first break. So the questions that Laurie shared for us are on the board. So please, let's move to that now.